Welcome back to ABA Beyond the Data. I'm your host, Jay Burton, BCBA, and the proud dad of two incredible boys who just happen to be on the autism spectrum. If you've been following along, you know this podcast isn't just about data and journal articles. It's about bridging what we know with how we actually show up for the kids and families we serve. Because ABA, at its core, isn't just a science. It's human. It's relationships. It's compassion applied with structure. And the perspectives you will hear in this podcast come not only from my years of clinical practice, but also from living this journey of being a parent with children on the spectrum. What you'll hear in this podcast is going to be coming from the latest research on the topics we cover, my personal professional reflections, and most importantly, a parent perspective that few working in this field can truly offer. And with the end goal of providing more practical strategies that you can apply to your own practices. Each episode, I hope to cover a topic that is important to those working in the field of ABA, specifically within the domain of autism intervention. I want to avoid the things that really just apply to those in white coat labs and focus more on applying the research in realistic ways that I believe can actually benefit us as clinicians and, of course, the families and clients we serve. And I believe today's topic is the perfect example of research being applied. Now, if you've been working in the field the last few years, you have likely heard of the word Assent. But what you may have not heard about is the intervention that set this whole movement from compliance-based interventions to assent-based interventions off. The intervention that set sail to 1,000 ships, an intervention that moved an entire field. The intervention known as the My Way strategy or the My Way approach, properly called skill-based training or SBT for short. To those out there in the assent-based community of ABA, it has become something of a buzzword. But for those still setting sail on the compliance side of things, this is going to be completely new to you. But I think the reality is that too many people reference it without really understanding what it is or how to actually apply it. It's not a single script and it's not a magic fix. It's a thoughtful, evidence-based process for helping learners replace severe behaviors with functional communication, flexibility, tolerance, and emotional regulation. And here's the word that I really want to emphasize. This intervention is designed specifically for handling severe behavior. Too often I hear the compliance-based folks telling me that Assent is great for those with low magnitude behaviors, but that we got nothing for severe behavior. But let me tell you right now, that is 100% wrong. So let's jump into this and see why exactly this protocol just wipes the slate on older compliance-based interventions. When the study came out in 2014, it was revolutionary because it flipped the old narrative of behavior reduction on its head. Instead of starting with extinction or compliance, it started with communication, safety, and dignity, which is crazy to think, but this was revolutionary at its time. It taught kids to say, my way, instead of melting down, and later on to calmly say, okay, when told not now or to wait. It's a model built around cooperation, not control. And that's a shift from compliance to collaboration. It's why it continues to shape so much of modern ABA. But here's the thing. Reading about My Way in a journal is one thing. Implementing it in a real session with real clients, real families, and real dynamics is something entirely different. That's what this episode is all about. We're going to walk through exactly how to bring this model to life in your clinic or the homes that you're working in. What to teach first, what mistakes to avoid, and how to stay true to the compassionate foundations even when sessions get a little messy. Because if there is one thing I've learned as both a BCBA and a parent, it's that compassion without structure isn't sustainable. And structure without compassion, it's not ethical. The My Way approach lives right at the intersection of those two things. It's science meeting empathy. It's data supporting what our gut already tells us that kids do best when they feel safe and heard and respected. Now, before I dive any deeper into this, let me remind you, BCBAs or BCABAs, or heck, maybe a BCBAD if you happen to be listening, that you can earn CUs from this episode. As always, there's going to be 3 keywords scattered throughout the episode. Make sure you jot those down, or if you're driving and listening, to voice memo yourself, because you're going to need those 3 keywords for when you want to get your CU certificate. When you want to get your CU certificate, head over to aba-cus.com, drop in those 3 keywords onto the episode, and boom, you'll get it back to you within about 24 hours. All right, guys, so let's dive into this. So, if you're a BCBA or an RBT or a clinic leader who's ready to move beyond theory, ready to take the ideas of compassionate, assent-based practices and actually implement them in a meaningful, research-backed way, this episode is for you. We'll start with a brief look at where this approach came from and why it matters. But the majority of our time today is going to be practical. We'll talk about how to run the open ended interview, how to teach the initial communication response, and how to build tolerance. And of course, how to coach your team to do it safely and consistently. This isn't just about reducing problem behaviors. It's about teaching new ways to communicate, to cope, and to connect with your clients. It's about building trust between your child and the adults in the room so that learning can actually start to happen. So let's start off by grounding ourselves where all of this began. Back in 2014, Dr. Hanley and his colleagues published what would become one of the most influential studies in modern applied behavior analysis. A paper, and boy does it have a long name, a paper in the Journal of Applied Behavioral Analysis titled Producing Meaningful Improvements in Problem Behaviors of Children with Autism through through dang, that is a long name. Through synchronized reinforcement and skill-based treatment. That is a really long name. And it's one of the reasons why so many of us just call it the My Way approach, or for some of our more clinically appropriate individuals, skill-based treatment. I first learned of this intervention as the My Way approach because it is the key word that is used for several of the participants in the beginning aspect of this study. And many of the replication studies and many of the individuals that replicated this study in their clinics with their clients use the words my way as the initial functional communication. Definitely over the last several years, I have seen it be more commonly stated as SBT, which is skill based training. And I do think that is a better name for it. But honestly, it's always going to be the my way approach for me. But it is seriously hard to describe how big of a deal this paper is. For decades before it, our standard approach to severe behavior followed a pretty familiar pattern. We ran traditional FAs, identified one or more functions, escape, tangible, maybe automatic, and then designed an intervention that either withheld that reinforcement or delivered it contingent on specific replacement responses. It was systematic, it was effective on paper, and it made sense within the science of ABA. But here's the uncomfortable truth that Hanley and many others felt at the time. While those interventions worked at reducing the problem behaviors, they didn't always feel good to implement. And I can say this from personal experience. I was living in the age of compliance when I got into this. I mean, literally, 2014 is just a year after I got into this field. So, yeah, for me, I was still living deep in the compliance age. And I can tell you that the interventions we were using didn't always feel great. They felt kind of icky. They relied on extinction procedures that produced long, distressing bursts of behaviors. They prioritized compliance over collaboration, and they often ignored the emotional and relational side of learning. So, Dr. Hanley and his team asked a very different kind of question when they proposed this research to the world. What if we could treat severe behavior without the power struggle? What if we could design a process that was function based, evidence driven, but also compassionate? One that didn't just suppress behavior, but taught communication, flexibility, and trust. It was essentially an experiment that challenged everything. An experiment in redesigning how we approach treatment, not just how we implement it. And they changed it from the ground up, guys. It started by rebuilding how we even did functional analysis. Instead of isolating each potential function, attention in one condition, escape in another, tangible in a third, they synthesized them. They combined the reinforcers that were typically present when the problem behavior occurred in the real world. Why, you ask? Because in real life, kids don't tantrum just for one thing at a time. It's not only attention or only escape, it's often a mix. The child wants to stop a demand, have access to a preferred item, and get reassurances from all the adults all at once. By blending these contingencies into one test condition, they created something more accurately reflecting everyday life and environment. In the control condition, the child had continuous access to the reinforcements attention, toys, and no demands. They got everything they wanted. But in the test conditions, those same reinforcers were removed for a brief period. If the problem behavior occurred, all of them were returned immediately. And the result was a striking difference. Each child, and remember these were kids with severe, dangerous problem behaviors, showed a clear differentiation between the conditions. The data made it obvious that the behavior was maintained by a combination of reinforcers, not a single isolated one. On its own, that is a major finding. I think if you've been a BCBA long enough, you've seen a behavior that is multiply functionally maintained. But from the traditional FA standpoint, there can only be one, right? But in our guts, we all know that that isn't real. I've seen a behavior change functions like 4 times in less than 2 minutes. And yeah, an FA won't capture that, but that's the reality of the situations that we're dealing with in real life. So to see that in a research article, to see somebody out there actually say, yeah, that is real, that's a huge deal, guys. And we'll cover this a little bit later in the rest of the episode, but they developed an entire new FA system for this study. Years later, Hanley and his colleagues would actually formalize this into a new FA system called Interviewed, Informed, Synthesized Contingency Analysis. Almost tripped on that one. My goodness. Hanley, if I've got any feedback for you, it is to come up with shorter titles. But you can, as a shorthand, call it IISCA, which is still a mouthful. We'll talk a little bit later about this. But to all that to say that this alone is an incredible achievement, but what he would do next would revolutionize the field as we know it. They built a completely new treatment model around this FA, the skill based treatment, or the my way strategy, as I like to call it, which consists of three major components. First, functional communication training, where the child learns to request what they want appropriately. A simple, all purpose phrase like my way. Second is tolerance training, where the child is taught to calmly accept no or not right now and respond by saying okay. And third, to have the child engage in a response chaining procedure where the child learns to complete a brief adaptive task during the wait time before eventually receiving the actual reinforcement. When you hear it laid out like that, it might sound simple, and it kind of is, but the impact is profound. Across all participants in his study, severe behavior problems dropped to near zero, not reducing by half, not just improved, but almost completely eliminated. And these weren't minor behaviors, guys. We're talking about aggression, self injury, destructive property destruction, which were going on for years and disrupting not just families, but schools. And in their place, the kids started using clear, functional communication. They learned to say my way to make a request and okay when told to wait. They didn't just stop problem behaviors, they gained real life skills, flexibility, patience, and emotional regulation. What's more, those skills actually generalized across settings and maintained over time, which is huge to say the least. Parents and teachers were able to use the same language, the same routines, and the same calm reinforcement patterns at home and at school, with the outcomes being near identical. That's not just statistically significant, that was socially significant. The families described feeling relief for the first time in years in the study. Here's an intervention that didn't depend on aversive procedures. There were no timeouts, no planned ignoring sessions that lasted a half an hour, no deliberate breakdowns of behaviors to test extinctions. The process was built entirely around reinforcement, trust, and teaching. That study was a line in the sand. It showed that we could achieve the same or even better outcomes using an approach that was safer, faster, and more humane. After 2014, research teams around the world started replicating and expanding on the work. And shortly after that, in 2016, the IISCA assessment came out and brought about an FA that relied less on long series of isolated test sessions, and instead clinicians could focus on gathering information through caregivers or teachers and then use brief observations, then test a single combined condition that matched the child's everyday experience. This IISCA assessment tool, along with the My Way approach that was initially studied, would lay the groundwork for the modern evolution of skill based treatment. And then later in 2021, Dr. Hanley and his colleagues would publish the article Assent-based Practices, which ties back to the philosophy behind My Way strategies. They argued that effective treatment should balance safety, dignity, and clinical outcomes. In other words, just because we can reduce problem behaviors doesn't mean we're doing it the right way. It doesn't mean it should be the compliance way. That paper formalized a concept that the My Way model had demonstrated years earlier, that assent isn't a checkbox, it's a relationship. It's ongoing, it's observable, and it should be built into the treatment process itself. And that brings us to where we are today. When you read the 2025 CAS practice guidelines, which I highly recommend that every BCBA does, Section 4 lays out the standards for individualized function based treatment. It emphasizes the use of evidence based assessment procedures, the teaching of alternative communication skills, and the consideration of learner assent and emotional regulation in the treatment design itself. If that sounds familiar, it's because they were directly taken from Dr. Hanley's work. So, why was the My Way such a turning point? Because it marked a shift from compliance based extinction to assent based skill building. It wasn't just a tweak to the functional analysis process, it was a complete reorientation of our values as clinicians. Instead of asking, how do I make this behavior stop? The question became, how do I teach this learner to get their needs met in a way that's safe, respectful, and effective for everyone? And I know this is going to be crazy to hear, but at the time, this was some radical thinking. Like, take it from an individual that had just started in the field around this time. Extinction and compliance training was the name of the game. It was the gold standard of the time. The idea that you could reduce severe behavior without letting it run its course felt to some like heresy. But Hanley's team showed that we didn't have to choose between effectiveness and ethics. We could have both. If we were willing to rethink our assumptions, we could live in a world where both effectiveness and ethics could actually intertwine. This model does more than just reduce behavior, it transforms the entire dynamic between the child and the adult. It shifts us from being enforcers of the rules to facilitators of growth. It teaches that cooperation isn't something we demand, it's something we build through trust. That's why this approach has become the backbone of what we now call compassionate ABA or assent-based ABA. It's not a different science. It's the same science, guys, applied with more care. That's all. It's recognizing that our data represents people, not problems or behaviors to be fixed, but people. So as we move forward in this episode, I want you to keep that in mind. The My Way approach isn't about running a new protocol or memorizing a sequence of steps. It's about embracing a philosophy, one where behavior change is built on trust, not tension. And that philosophy is what we're going to unpack next, because the next part of our discussion isn't about what the research showed, it's about what you can do tomorrow in your session to bring this model to life. But before we move on, here's your first keyword for today's episode: communication. That's COMMUNICATION. Communication. Because at the heart of this entire model, communication is what turns conflict into cooperation. Alright, now that we've set the stage with the background and the research, let's talk about the how. What does it actually look like when we implement this process step by step? What do we say? What do we teach first? And how do we keep it compassionate when real life challenges kick in? Let's dive in, guys. Step 1 starts before any data sheet or graph is ever even thought of. It starts with a conversation. We sit down with the caregiver in a quiet, comfortable space and conduct an open-ended interview with a simple purpose of figuring out what the reinforcers, triggers, and routines that are actually run the day-to-day in the client's home. Using the IISCEA interview form, it's going to take about 30 to 40 minutes max, especially if you're like me. I kind of just blab on and on and on, for like an hour straight, which is why I have an hour straight podcast. But for real, it shouldn't take much more than 30 minutes on average. And this is, as I said, going to be going over the child's language, their play skills, their preferred activities to engage in, and of course, what the problem behaviors look like, when they happen, and crucially, how the adults typically respond in the moment. That last piece being most critical because we are going to literally put that exact situation in front of the client later to test out the function of the behaviors. For me, I typically invite the caregivers to walk me through a normal afternoon. When you're making dinner and your attention is split, what tends to happen? If you say, hold on, what's their move? What do you do next to calm things down? I'll also ask which toys or activities are non negotiable, the ones the child will work hard to keep no matter what, and what is the single most concerning behavior right now. I also recommend doing an observation period with the family in the home where the behaviors are actually happening so that you can replicate these situations to near precision in the next step. So, step two is where we stop guessing and actually test the story we heard in the interview. We set up a brief, well controlled comparison to see whether the child's behavior is really sensitive to the mix of things that happen in everyday life: attention, tangible, escape from a demands, and even having it their way. This is the synthesized functional analysis. You replicate what you saw and what you heard from the interview and the observation, and you test it out. It's a simple design. You alternate a control session with a test session, and the only difference between them is whether the suspected reinforcement contingency is operating. In the control, reinforcers are available the whole time. In the test, those reinforcers are briefly removed and then only returned if problem behavior occurs. That's it. Two conditions, clean contrast, and it mirrors the real world because the contingencies are blended the same way the families described them in the interview. Okay, let's try to actually imagine this. Let's paint a picture. So the control always comes first. If the interview suggested that attention and preferred activities are part of the issue, then during the control we provide those throughout and avoid instructions. The room looks calm, toys out, parents or analysts engaged, no interruption. Then we alternate to the test. At the start of the test, we remove what mattered. Attention turns away, toys are put up, or the adult introduces a demand that interrupts the child's activity. If the problem behavior happens, or if there is any precursor behaviors being displayed that likely indicate that the behaviors are going to escalate, the adult returns the whole package. We keep the available materials constant across both conditions, and anything not implicated in the suspected contingency stays available non contingently in both the test and the control. By holding everything else steady, the only difference between the test and the control is the consequence relation we're evaluating. And in the study, across the participants, we can see exactly how this plays out. With the client named Gail, attention and tangibles were synthesized. In control conditions, attention and toys were available and no instructions were given. In tests, both were removed at the start and both came back for 30 seconds after problem behavior. The team then alternated who implemented sessions, analyst and the mother, with the analyst present to coach as needed, which is a nice model for safety and fidelity. With Dale, the other client, the control looked like uninterrupted access to his preferred activities and honoring reasonable requests. In tests, the adult interrupted what he was doing and presented homework with a supportive prompting hierarchy. If problem behavior occurred, demands were lifted and his preferred activities and reasonable requests were reinstated. That captures how multiple reinforcers traveled together in daily life and why they were analyzed together rather than in isolation. With Bob, two everyday contexts, iPad and math, were assessed separately but with the same logic. Control allowed him to do things his way. Tests introduced interruptions, redirection, or correction, and problem behaviors produced a quick return to his way of doing it. And two quick words: brief is the key here. In traditional FAs, the condition could last 10 minutes or so. With this, we're talking anywhere between 30 seconds to 5 minutes. So, like, much less time. And when the problem behavior occurs, we go back to the control condition, guys. And this is key. We don't actually need to see the problem behaviors themselves. We can instead just rely on seeing the precursor behaviors or those initial triggers that indicate the bigger behavior is coming. We do not need to see the behaviors themselves. So I really want to make sure that is clear. We do not want to see full escalation from the client that is sending the client into behavior unnecessarily. Precursors are just enough to show us the function of the behavior and the conditions in which they are typically ignited. So the second you begin to see those precursor behaviors, it is time to end the test period. And second is safety is extremely critical here, guys. This is a methodology designed for severe behaviors. We cannot forget that. It has to be conducted in a location that is safe, in an environment where we have removed all dangerous objects, where we can quickly and safely respond to any full escalation. And while all of this is going on, we're also collecting a huge amount of data. I mean, you cannot just do this by yourself. You need multiple staff here. But you are collecting interval data, likely at intervals of 10 to 30 seconds to see how long it takes before the behavior begins. It also gives you a baseline for the tolerance of the child and how long in the test condition before they begin to escalate, which will be critical to know during the tolerance phase of training. And so, how do you know how many conditions to run with this? I always hate saying this, but a little bit of it is a gut feeling, right? Like, have I seen enough to differentiate between the two, the control and the test? We should be seeing a clear differentiation, in the control, there should be near zero problem behavior. And during the test, we should be seeing reliably elevated behaviors. Please remember that children are not so black and white. Some children may remain escalated in the control period or may just have other conditions of which are escalating them during those control conditions. But just please look for a clear differentiation. There should be at least a noticeable difference. Once you see that noticeable difference, go ahead and end the assessment because at that point you have enough data to move on, and we don't want to carry this on any longer than we need to. In the studies, they did this across multiple days. I'm not going to lie to you, though. I've got this done in an afternoon. Sorry, all you lab coats out there. I know that's probably not the correct answer you all want to hear, but getting the information is the most critical aspect. And honestly, of all the FA versions out there, I have to say that this is my favorite because of how quickly you can actually get it done. The interview sets you up for success. All right, and now moving into step 3, we are starting to actually teach the replacement skills that will carry the whole model. A simple communication response. Right here, I am not asking the child to thread a needle of social nuance or wait through a long delay. All I'm doing is teaching a clear, powerful way to get their needs met that maps directly onto the contingencies we just verified. In the original study, the team taught a single plain language phrase that bundles those reinforcers together. For the subject Gail, it was toys. For Dale and Bob, the ones whose behaviors was maintained by adults interrupting or correcting, and by loss of access to preferred activities, it was my way, which is where we get the nickname for the intervention itself. So if you're wondering, why is it called the My Way strategy? That's it right there. 2 out of the 3 participants use my way as the key phrase for getting their way. But the point was function, not poetry. Say the thing that gets you the thing, clean and simple. What matters here is the mechanics, not how it sounds, not what it looks like, just the mechanics. We're going to set up the occasion. We're going to model as little as we can get away with, and we deliver the reinforcer fast and richly when the learner uses the new response. In Hanley's procedure, if a child didn't respond within 5 seconds, the adult gave a brief vocal prompt, literally saying, say, my way, and then honor the communication when it came through. At the same time, problem behavior no longer produced reinforcement through the classic extinction procedures. And if the FCR came right on the heels of a problem behavior, the therapist made sure at least 5 seconds passed before delivering anything. So we weren't accidentally reinforcing the escalation that preceded the request. Here's how I coach my staff in those early sessions because tone and timing are everything. I'll say something like, as soon as you see my way, or as soon as you hear my way, give it to them. Even if it's a whisper, slide that reinforcement right back where it was at, drop the demand and join them for the moment. Reinforce them, praise them, and take a moment. If they're on the iPad, watch that video with them and commentary on what they're watching. Blow it out of the water. Make it so obvious that communication works way better than the old behavior. Every kid is a little bit different, but I can't tell you how many times I've just like blown things up. Just woo! Great job, dude. I mean, they get the tickles, the iPad, everything they wanted. We want to make it so black and white, such a clear differentiation from what behavior leads to, which is just nothing now, and instead to this just oversized positive reaction. And of course, I anchor expectations. There is still a chance of behaviors occurring. In this study, they prompted within 5 seconds, but I oftentimes prompt immediately, airlessly, at the beginning phases to reduce that likelihood. But the behaviors will still pop up, and it's important that we are not lecturing, we don't negotiate with them, we don't fill the silence. You're not going to be cold to this, you're consistent. That's all it is. We're giving them space, we're waiting them out. We watch for that 5 seconds and then respond the first time we hear any appropriate approximation of proper communication. It's the combination of fast reinforcement for the right response and zero reinforcement for the wrong one that makes the contingency crystal clear to the learner. But it's important to remember here that we need to stay trauma informed. We should not be completely ignoring the child. We should not be removing 100% attention from this. It is okay to recognize a child's emotions, and when safe to do so, to comfort them as they need through these distressing moments. It's okay to ignore the behavior, but we shouldn't be ignoring the child. Keeping near enough that's safe to the child and reminding them of using their functional communication to get back to where they were is all you need to do. Do not be cold to the clients. All right, and then heading into step 4 of like 9. We still have several more steps to go, guys. But moving into the next step, once that simple request is fluent, we widen the lens and make it sound like real life. This is where we introduce complex FCT, which is basically where we teach the social choreography that most adults use without thinking. Get attention first, wait to be acknowledged, then make a polite request. I'll set the stage for the team like this. We're going to shape a short chain that sounds natural in everyday settings. The sequence is excuse me, pause, make eye contact. Then, when the adult signals they're listening, can I have my way? We're not working on manners here, guys. We're working on a predictable routine. This is the behavior we need to engage in real life outside of the lab, right? Now, with every single addition into this strategy, we need to be making sure that we are staying aware of the behaviors. At this point, all we've essentially added is a short pause. But here's the reality, that short pause might be just enough to send the child into a behavior. So if problem behaviors crept back in, access needs to be withheld. No debate, no extra language. So the only reliable path is this polite little chain that we've created. It's simple, but it's extremely important that we get this right. And this is why role play with your staff is so critical at this point. I'll play the learner, the RBT plays the clinician, and I'll purposely miss the excuse me aspect or the form in which the client is getting the attention from the staff member. Or I'll make sure to mumble the my way so that the staff know to go in and prompt appropriately. We're at the more complex level of communication at this point, so the small amount of communication or the mumbles that worked at the initial stage are no longer going to be accepted. So it is critical that our staff understand how to prompt through this appropriately and correctly. But of course, as we introduce every new step, we need to make sure that we are using errorless teaching during these phases and that we are giving an overabundance of reinforcement for the appropriate responding that we get from them. So, step 4 is the extended FCT. They gain attention from us, they wait for us to respond, and then they give their mand. Okay, and now we're moving into step 5. We are setting the stage for teaching flexibility for briefly showing that denied or delayed reinforcement still matters. This is the delay and denial baseline. Think of it as a calibrated reality check before we actually move in and teach tolerance. Because up to this point, the child has learned that clear communication works. It gets quick access to the reinforcement reliably. In real life, though, adults are going to sometimes say, not now, or just simply no. Now, at this point, this is going to sound weird, but just remember we are just in baseline. We want to see what the actual tolerance looks like for these kids. And specifically, we need the latency between the denial signal going out and the behavior itself, which has classically got them reinforcement. So, you're going to give the denial and then measure how long it takes before they begin to engage in the precursor behaviors. It's important to note there, again, just like the FA, we're not trying to get them into a behavior. But once we see that precursor behavior, we are going to reinforce that precursor behavior. And we have to get this baseline in to understand what their actual latency is, because the next phase is the tolerance phase. That's where we flip the script and we teach the client to say okay and start building real flexibility. This is the heart of the shift from control to cooperation. We're going to teach a simple response in replacement of that fuse being lit. And so the client's going to be using the same chain that they've already been using. They gain attention, wait for the adult response, and then give their mand. But now, on 2 out of 5 instances, they are going to be receiving a denial. And this is where that tolerance baseline comes in. Based off of that baseline, you're going to have them wait to get the access for a little less than what baseline was. So if for Jimmy, the baseline was 3 seconds, this is what it's going to look like as a sequence. Jimmy approaches, taps somebody on the shoulder. The individual responds by making eye contact. Jimmy asks for the tablet. They say, not now. Jimmy says, okay, or they prompt him to say, okay, and they wait 2 seconds, and then he gets the tablet. As we see continued independence with the FCR, and as we see the problem behavior stay at 0, we begin to expand that tolerance time out further and further. And as we expand it out, we move into the next stage, which is to provide a small task of completion for the wait period. For some kids, that's a short, simple play action with a less preferred materials. For others, it's a brief, easy instruction: stand up, put a block on the bin, press pause, count to 10, write your name. Early on, these are level 1 expectations. They're short, they're concrete, they're success heavy, measured in seconds. When those are smooth, we shift to like a level 2, slightly longer engagement or simple transition. And eventually we move into a level 3 type task, the highest level type task, where the behavior looks like real life. Alternate play, a self-help step, or a short academic task before access. The goal isn't to pile on work, it's to build the lived experience that I can hear, not now, do something small and doable and still get what I asked for without a blow up. Now let's take a second to talk about troubleshooting here for a second, because in the tolerance phase, moving into the chaining phase with the small tasks being implemented, this is likely where we're going to see a little bit of wobble, where we're likely to see a little bit of behavior to actually start to pop up. So if escalations reemerge after denial queue, you have three levers at this point. First, shrink the delay back to the last level that was clean. We don't win the moment by holding the line. We win the process by protecting the momentum. So if you had been on a level 2 type task, one that required a little bit longer period, then drop back down to a level 1 type task, something that only takes a second or two to complete, and accept that as the new level. You're going to need to work there for a little bit until you've reassured that we have stability. The second lever is making sure that reinforcement is at an all-time max as we transition one tolerance level to the next. And then third is make sure that we have clear and clean fidelity as we are implementing these things. If our responses aren't clean, especially across teams, if there are teams in place, then you are likely to be running into more behaviors with individuals that do not have a clean response to those that do have a clean response that's rapid. If the tolerance phase is supposed to only be 2 seconds and somebody's pushing it to 4, I know that 2 seconds doesn't sound like a lot, but that's enough to ignite a behavior. If you've worked in severe behavior, you know an extra 2 seconds can mean a lot. Okay, we're going to pause there for a second. The second key word is tolerance. 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 We're not teaching kids to give up. We're teaching them to breathe, wait, and to trust their needs can be met without a fight. Tolerance. So let's skim back over this tolerance level a little bit more because we rapidly went through those levels. So let me explain what this looks like in a little bit more detail. So level 1 are actions that can be measured in seconds. These are actions that the client has regularly engaged in willingly in the past. For a preschooler, it might be put the red block in the bin or roll the car to me. For an early elementary learner, it might be touch the picture, then your name, or put your book on the table. For an older child, level 1 can be as small as press pause on the tablet and count to 5, or write your name once. The goal at this level is momentum, quick success, quick access. Once level 1 is smooth, we shift to level 2. Still simple, but a touch longer or involving a light transition. Now, at this point, it is extremely beneficial to start mixing in parts of a task that has triggered the behaviors in the past. A preschooler might clean up 3 pieces or match 2 pieces of a card game before access. An elementary learner might complete a one single step math problem or read a short sentence, then get reinforcement. And an older learner might put away a preferred activity, walk with you to the table, and open the correct workbook. Then they're done. We keep the prompts minimal, we praise calm cooperation, and do our best to stay predictable. Level 3 is where things start to look like real life. As I said earlier, demands are increased to the level of which behaviors typically occur. If the behavior occurs when transitioning and cleanup, we are placing the whole demand to transition and cleanup. If it occurs at work time, it's no longer just coming to the table and being done. It's coming to the table and answering a question or several. The sequence is always the same: polite request, calm okay to the brief denial, then the achievable task, and the earn access. But here is the thing to truly understand. Yes, in research it was described in 3 levels. Sure. But in reality, it's whatever number of levels the client needs. You are constantly looking at the behavior data and at the communication data to see if both are at 100%. Some kids may be able to make big jumps, delays of 2 seconds to 15. Others might need a delay of 2, then delay of 3, then to 4, then to 5, and so on. It might be an older client first just tolerating a delay for 2 seconds, then tolerating walking to the table, then tolerating all that plus sitting, each of those broken into its own level. This isn't a slow process. So, yes, it is 3 levels in research, but in practice, maybe it's 2 dozen. Maybe we're breaking every single step in the work process down and working on each of those sequentially. We are teaching tiny steps, tiny little pieces of a chain that eventually become true independence. And once we start to see that true independence, we move into the final step. This is where we take the training wheels off and let the model live where the behaviors actually happen. We are generalizing to the regular environments, to the regular individuals that this child is interacting with. And we start by coaching the adults who matter most, the parents, right inside the same structured sessions we've been running. We're doing an in depth training before we put them into the situation, but after that, we are standing shoulder to shoulder with them, prompting them through them, and supporting them as they need into the session. We start off with just peppering the parents into the session, maybe a 5 minute involvement. But as we go, as we stretch out this tolerance, we deliberately blur the edges of session until it's no longer a session at all. Instead of 5 minute blocks, we catch moments. We're prepping dinner, leaving for school, pausing for the iPad, starting homework. The sequence stays at the same, but the packaging looks like real life. And those 8 easy steps, okay, maybe not quite that easy, but those are the 8 steps to implementing this procedure. And I know that's a lot of steps for any procedure, but when we really think about it, what we have is assess, FCT training, tolerance training, work toleration, and then generalization. That's really all it is when we break it down. And the last key thing to really work on here is the data. Unlike classical compliance training and interventions that rely heavily on extinction procedures, the data has to be constantly monitored because the treatment won't advance without it. Adjusting things just slightly for each flat line of behavior requires constant oversight. We need to track every change and mark every phase change in the graphs. In my client sessions, my RBTs are tracking the behavior goals, functional communication, and how often the tolerance response ignites a behavior. Alongside those, we document reinforcement time so we can see the balancing shift from mostly access early on to a healthier split as delays lengthen and the response chains take hold. And fidelity needs the same attention. I know fidelity checks get second row to the rest of the data for some reason, but this is critical, especially if the team is anything more than 2 staff. Before we hand sessions to RBTs, we need to rehearse with them and be completing competency checklists that, just use simple yes, no responses, but that check the whole process is being done correctly so that we make sure that our fidelity looks good. Because if one team member is off, they could mess up this whole dang intervention, guys, and potentially actually make the behaviors worse than when they started. I am running trainings at every phase change, and I'm typically running these before the day actually begins in a little team huddle because things are changing rapidly. And I know this isn't possible at every organization, but truly it is so important that we get these trainings in so that we can model it with the staff so that they can go into session confident and not be getting hands-on training in the middle of the situation. That is not key. That is where the behaviors start up again. Okay, and before I wrap up the session, I want to go over some quick troubleshooting strategies or things that I have seen while implementing this procedure and how I've responded to improve it. And I think the first thing is to remember that it is extremely important that safety and compassion be the constant backbone of this whole thing. Do not rush this procedure. It will take as long as it needs. We keep the instructions at level 1 until communication is independent and problem behavior is at 0. Only then do we stretch the delay or add the next link in the chain. We stay disciplined about non reinforcement for problem behaviors after the denial, but we never confuse non reinforcement with coldness. My coaching line to staff is always save your warmth for the behaviors you want. Neutral when the old patterns flicker, warm the instant you hear the okay or my way. That's how we maintain assent in practice. The learner can predict our faces, our pace, and the next beat, and predictability is what keeps stimulation low enough for learning to stick. Okay, another problem I oftentimes see is extinction bursts during this procedure, especially when you are beginning to move into the denial phase or when you're moving up the next level. So, first, remember that the procedure is built with purpose. It wasn't just randomly thrown together. We collected baseline before entering into anything and reached mastery before moving up. Extinction bursts are absolutely possible, and you're still going to get them. But we also may not. If you take such small steps forward, they may not even realize that over a large number of sessions, we have vastly increased the workload. But of course, when we begin tolerance training, problem behavior no longer produces access. But if a burst shows up, we don't power through a long delay. We pivot down to the last clean level that had a 0 problem behavior and stay on that phase for a bit longer. If we try to move up again and still get behaviors, then maybe to try to find a smaller step to move up to. If you move from sitting at the table to sit and write name, maybe the halfway point is sit at the table and just pick up the pencil. And if that isn't stabilizing, maybe we sweeten the contrast, make the good moments great. Calm delay with independent compliance earns a longer access period and more good stuff. That way, dignity stays intact, but the path we want continues to move forward. And another common question that pops up is how this can be applied to non vocal learners. The principles don't change, the topography does. The study participants were vocal, but nothing in the contingency requires speech. Your simple FCR can be a button press on an AAC device with a single custom phrase that functions like the omnibus request, my way, or a sign, or a picture exchange, or who knows, maybe even a button, though I think a button would probably be the last option. But hey, I've seen some of the buttons now come out as watches or as necklaces. So there are options out there. And we still teach the same chain. They first get attention, probably by tapping instead of saying, excuse me, wait for the acknowledgement, and then they give the end. And if you're moving into tolerance training, when we say not now, a simple thumbs up works for the okay. Or heck, even just a big head nod. The crucial features are the same. Get attention, make the omnibus request, accept not now with a brief observable response that we can shape, and then complete a tiny action before access. When you implement it as designed, you conduct the interview, you do a synthesized analysis, you do FCR training, denial baseline, tolerance training, response chains, and then extinction procedures as needed. You don't just get fewer crises, you get a different kind of session, a different sound and home, and a different feeling in your clinic. It feels like collaboration. It feels like learning. It feels like the best version of ABA, evidence-based, humane, and built on trust. Okay, let's pause there for the third and final keyword, which is cooperation. 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 As clinicians, we can map every beat of the process to research. The omnibus request we taught on purpose, the denial presented calmly on a predictable schedule, the tolerance response shaped and reinforced The level 1 tasks embedded in the delay, the return to reinforcement without drama. As a parent, though, we just feel the difference. The house is calmer. I'm not negotiating with a timer in one hand and my heart in the other. The kids trust that not now is honest and that okay isn't giving up his needs. It's getting them met just in a better way. That's the big difference between compliance and cooperation. Compliance is do it because I said so. And it might work fast, but it costs you something you don't always see right away. Your relationship, your child's sense of safety, and their willingness to try again tomorrow. Cooperation is built. It's taught in small, reliable steps. Ask clearly, accept not now with a brief response, do one short thing, get what you asked for. It's that easy. The My Way model doesn't pretend disappointment disappears. It gives kids something to do with it. And the adults learn something too. How to be consistent without being cold, how to honor communication without fear, and how to say not now without lighting a fuse. I want to be clear about this next part because it matters to the families who've been through a lot. The goal here isn't control, it's trust, safety, and dignity. The research didn't get its results by outlasting kids in power struggles. It got them by front loading success, by teaching requests that actually work, by showing kids that okay leads somewhere, and by keeping the tasks inside the delay small enough to win. When parents in those studies took the approach home, they reported being more comfortable presenting the tough situations. That's not just data. That's a parent exhaling at the end of the day. And that's where I land when I wear both hats, BCBA and dad. I want my kids and the kids I serve to feel heard first. Because when kids feel heard, we don't need to take their control away to teach them. We give them a way to ask. We give them a way to wait. We give them a way to contribute. And we give them a way back to what they love without a fight. It's not perfect and it's not instant, but it's humane, it's teachable, and it holds up. All right, guys, let's wrap this up. Today, we walked through the My Way approach, the way it's meant to be used in order, with intention, and with care. If you take one thing from this episode, let it be this. My Way is a process, not a protocol. It isn't a single trick to pull out when things get hard. It's a progression that starts with understanding the real contingencies, teaches powerful ways to ask, and builds courage and skills to hear not now. When you keep that sequence intact, communication first, then tolerance, then adaptation, you get durable change without the collateral damage. Fidelity plus compassion equals results. If your timing is crisp, but your tone is cold, you lose Assent. If your heart is warm, but your contingencies are fuzzy, you'll lose clarity. The magic is in the middle. Acknowledge, excuse me, honor the full request quickly, present not now, calmly, on schedule, reinforce okay, the incident appears, and keep the task inside the delay small enough to win, and go step by step, little win by little win. That's how sessions sound different. That's how homes feel different. For CEU credits, here's what you need to do next. Head to aba-ceus.com. Find this episode 5, My Way Strategy. You'll need the 3 keywords from today. Enter those and you'll receive your certificate within 24 hours. My hope is that you walk into your next session with a clearer map and a calmer voice. Teach the tiny tasks that build independence, not because we're chasing compliance, but because we're building cooperation. When kids feel heard, we don't need to take their control away to teach them. We give it back to them in ways they can actually use. Thank you for spending this hour with me and going over the My Way strategy. If this episode helped, please share it with your teammates or the parents who could use this hope. I'm Jay Burton, and as always, thanks for going beyond the data.
Bye. See you next time.